The morning it happened, I ran a red light. I didn't even fully realize it until the car hit me. I remember the light was yellow when I entered the intersection. At least that's what I told myself. I was exhausted. I'd skipped my coffee, which sounds like such a small thing now, but I always needed that coffee. And that morning I was running late, already thinking about the race, thinking about my splits and the weather and the second light. I looked up and it was red. And there was a car coming at me so fast, it was like the driver had already anticipated the change, and there was nothing I could do. We hit each other at about 60 miles an hour, just like that. One moment, I was driving through Austin on a Tuesday morning, and the next moment, everything I thought I controlled was gone. I grew up in East Texas, out in the country, and my childhood had this strange split quality to it. On one side, there was all this freedom: open land, open sky, the kind of life where you wake up at 6 in the morning because you want to. My best friend and I would ride horses until the heat became unbearable, then go swim in the lake and float there for hours. That part of growing up felt like a genuine gift. There was something about being that embedded in nature that gave me a foundation I didn't know I had until much later. But my mother was mentally ill, and there was abuse, emotional, sometimes physical, and as an only child, there was nowhere to hide from it and no one to share it with. I retreated into books. I could see, even as a teenager, that education was going to be the thing that changed my life. So I wrote essays, entered every scholarship competition I could find, and I won. $20,000 from a mailbox that was practically falling over in front of a house that was barely holding together. I remember watching those checks arrive one by one and thinking, this is how I get out. The University of Texas was everything I'd imagined and also not. My grades were good at first, then they weren't, and by senior year, I was in a place I didn't want to look at too closely: a bad breakup, too much drinking, too much of everything. And underneath all of it, these panic attacks about mortality that I couldn't explain to anyone. I was agnostic. I genuinely did not believe there was anything after death. I'd studied Whitman, Emerson, Thoreau, found them beautiful but unconvincing. I thought my specific consciousness, the particular me, would simply stop. And sometimes that realization would hit me like cold water, and I'd lie awake terrified in a way that nothing else came close to. A therapist suggested I run. I'd run cross country in high school and loved it, so I threw everything into it: 9, 10 miles a day, training for a 10K in Austin. The night before the race, I had nightmares I don't talk about often because the timing of them still unsettles me. I felt like something was coming. I woke up exhausted, skipped the coffee, got in my car. When the impact happened, I knew immediately something was badly wrong. I was slumped sideways, couldn't straighten up, couldn't move the way you assume. Without ever thinking about it, you will always be able to move. A woman stopped, a nurse, as it turned out, and she held my hand until the ambulance came. I've never forgotten her face. There are moments of pure human kindness that lodge in you permanently, and she is one of mine. At the hospital, they told me my back was broken in several places. I was strapped to a board for 7 hours because they needed a neurosurgeon's approval before they could give me anything for the pain, and I was screaming at people, crying, cycling through every emotion in minutes. At some point, I overheard something I was never supposed to hear. A neurosurgeon didn't want to come in because I had no health insurance. I was a college student who'd assumed insurance was a problem for later, and I lay there thinking, I am disposable. I have worked this hard, and I am just a body on a stretcher that someone is weighing against the inconvenience. When Dr. Flanders finally came in, I will always remember her name. I told her straight, I will kill myself if I can't walk, so you need to operate on me. She said she'd been on duty 40 hours, needed to sleep and eat, and then she was coming back to do the surgery. The relief was enormous. Someone was going to help me. They wheeled me in, and there was a sign somewhere that said 17% chance of death. I read it and thought, that's a high number, but I want to walk, so we're doing this. Dr. Flanders squeezed my hand just before they put me under. That's the last thing I remember from inside my body. The next thing I knew, I had popped out of it. That's the only way to describe it. I was suddenly in the corner of the operating room, looking down at everything. But the vision was nothing like normal sight. It was more like a 360-degree awareness, where I could zoom in on anything and still be aware of everything else. I could see the tops of the surgeons' heads, their hands. There was a radio on, an easy listening station, and I heard an Elvis song and thought, I know that station. I know exactly which one that is. And then this thought arrived with total certainty. I am alive. I live beyond this body. There is no word for the happiness of that moment. It was relief so complete, it felt like every nerve I'd ever owned unclenched at once. My entire life, I had been carrying this terror that I would simply stop. And in that corner of an operating room, I found out the terror had been wrong. I wanted to tell everyone I knew immediately. What I noticed next were the beings behind the surgeons. Nothing like illustrations from church. These were about 9 feet tall and made of light, dense and radiant. And they were intelligent in a way that communicated itself completely without words. They told me I would walk again, that I would run again, that everything would be fine. Then one of them said something like, "Watch this," and sent this energy through the surgeons that lit up my entire spine. I remember thinking, these doctors have to know this is happening. They're too brilliant not to know that something greater is working through them. Then the monitor flatlined. I looked at it and thought, oh, I'm technically dead. And I wasn't afraid. I moved through the walls. In that form, it's as natural as walking through a door, and found myself in a waiting room where my stepfather was at a vending machine getting a candy bar. He was always claiming to be a health nut, and I actually laughed. Then I kept moving, and I was above Austin in the night sky, just floating there, feeling more free than I'd ever felt in my life. I knew I was supposed to return, but I thought, I'm pretty far away now. Maybe I'm not. And if I just stayed, would that be okay? The answer was yes. Completely, peacefully, yes. There was no grief in the thought of staying, just this enormous sense of being held by something greater than anything I'd encountered in all my years of living. I started understanding things I hadn't before. The body is a limiter. It narrows what we can perceive. Outside of it, everything was wider, more vivid, more real than real. I had this clear thought, oh, this is the theater. These lives we're living are like performances we've chosen to put on. The costume, the drama, the whole thing. I felt everyone I'd ever known, not saw, felt. And I wanted to reach every one of them and say, I love you. Enjoy your life. That was the whole message. Not complicated, not conditional. Just love your life, because underneath everything is love, and everything else is a distraction from it. Then I was somewhere vast, like those deep field telescope images of space, this pink and golden expanse of stars and light going on forever. And I felt an intelligence approaching. Not a being with edges, but a presence, a consciousness too large to have a boundary, coming toward me as light. And it placed things inside me that felt like they'd always been there. Love is all that matters. It is the only thing you take with you. Be like a child again. Go back to nature. Those messages are still in me. I knew when I received them that I would never lose them. Then I was shown my life. It wasn't shameful or punishing. The moments that stood out were the quiet ones. Playing outside as a child, moments of real faith. Moments of love I hadn't recognized as significant when they happened. But I also saw myself clearly. I'd been proud of getting into UT and let that pride make me dismissive of people who hadn't gone the same route. I saw specific coworkers I'd barely acknowledged, and I was shown that these people had gone home and prayed for me. They saw that I was struggling, and they cared deeply, and I had never once given them the room to show me that. When I understood that, I almost broke. All that beauty I walked past every day because I was too busy deciding who mattered. After the review, I was somewhere green and open. Nothing dying, nothing decaying. My grandfather was there. He died of leukemia when I was young, and in that place, he was young himself, glowing, completely free of illness. We spent time together in a way that felt like being home. At some point, he asked if I wanted to continue. I felt something farther ahead pulling at me, and I knew it was God. I left and moved toward it, flying, I'd call it. And I felt every insecurity I'd ever carried just dissolve. Everything that had made me feel small or afraid, gone. I was moving toward the most loved I have ever felt. I got close, but there was a point where I couldn't go farther. Some threshold, and it turned my attention downward. Below me, there was a river with people walking on it, some lit, some in shadow. And I understood that the shadow was fear and the light was love. And those were the only two choices. That's it, the whole thing. I thought, simple enough. I'll go back and tell people to stop being afraid and love more. But what came back to me was a direction. You're going to be a teacher. I argued immediately. I had plans. Law school, the LSAT already taken, a life I'd been building toward since that mailbox in East Texas. Teaching wasn't in those plans. I told God essentially, no thank you. The last thing I heard in that presence was, you're going to be a teacher. And then I was back. Not gently, more like being compressed into something and thrown through darkness. And then I was in a recovery room and a nurse was asking my name. I was so disoriented, I answered in the third person. Her name is Trisha, she asked again. When I finally said my own name, I felt something I hadn't expected. Sadness. I had been connected to everything, and I had just been poured back into the limits of one specific person. The body holds pain, old memory, old patterns. Coming back into mine felt like being forced into a container I'd outgrown, and if I'd had any choice in it, I would not have come back. I spent 9 months in a body cast. I'd been running 9 miles a day, and afterward, I couldn't stand on my toes. My spine felt like it was on fire. But those 9 months gave me time most people don't get after these experiences. I read everything I could find, meditated, wrote down everything I'd seen before it could fade. When I could finally walk, I'd go out early in the morning to avoid the heat, and there were elderly neighbors who'd stop and ask about my story, people facing their own mortality, and they were my people that year. When I first made it to the end of the street, they stood there with their coffee and clapped. I'll never forget that. I got my teaching certification. Walked into my first classroom with no idea what to say, so I just told the truth. I told them I hadn't wanted to be there, and then I told them why I was. You could have heard a pin drop. Hands went up everywhere. From that first class on, there was a connection I can only call real. I am different than I was before that intersection. Before, I walked through the world sealed off, guarded, rationing my warmth. After, I felt love for strangers on the street the way you might feel it for close friends. I started sensing things in people, understanding things they hadn't said. Animals felt like kin. Trees felt alive in a way that wasn't metaphorical at all. What I know now is that fear is the only real obstacle. Not failure, not suffering, fear. Everything that blocks people from the love that is actually there, actually available, actually underlying all of it, comes down to fear. Nature helps break through it. Silence helps. Any moment when something in you wakes up and says, I have something to give, I am part of something larger, that is the moment. That is what I came back to point toward. I still think about that operating room. I still carry those messages. Love is all that matters. It is all you take with you. Go back to nature. Be like a child. I have days that feel very far from that pink expanse of stars. But underneath everything is a knowledge that doesn't move, and it is this. We go on. We are more than what we carry in these bodies. On the other side of all of this, there is only love. I have been there. I have felt it, and it is worth everything.